You've been home for a couple of years now, buddy, but you're still fighting the war.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Shoulder, Untold Stories from a Forgotten War, just one of the products at Grumpy Combat Veteran and Friends. Here at Shoulder, we share stories about the ways in which war affects us. Hi, everybody. I am Kate Kay, your co-host here today. And once again, Will is taking a knee, and we are so proud of him for understanding how to prioritize rest. So I choose not to be mad about it. I choose not to hold this over his head because I am very gracious like that. And because I'm super fortunate to be joined by our two guests today. We are here with Chris Purdy and Crystal Ellington, both of a new organization called the Chamberlain Network. And we will get a little bit more into what that organization is later. But welcome, both of you. Thank you for being here. And I wanted to give you each an opportunity to just give us your quick 30-second bio.
Great. Thanks for having us. I'm Chris Purdy. I'm the CEO and founder of the Chamberlain Network. I am an Army vet, served in Iraq in 2011. I was an educator for a long time. Decided to get into advocacy a few years ago, and I'm really excited to be here talking about democracy protection and what it means to veterans, the veteran community. I grew up in England during the Troubles, and saw how political violence can really impact civil society. And so I'm excited to be here talking about this message. And I'll kick it over to Crystal, who's on our board.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Chris and Kate. Thanks so much for having us here today. My name is Crystal Ellington. I am currently serving at the Pentagon. I work in the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Critical Technologies Office as a strategic communications lead. I am also an Army vet like Chris. I served in the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. I was a helicopter mechanic. It was a super fun time, learned a whole lot. Also served in Iraq. I was there in 2019, and super excited to talk with Chris and Kate today about how we are really encouraging and enabling veterans to protect our democracy.
I really like that. As soon as you said the word Pentagon, I was like, oh, I need to be a little bit more intimidated than I am. we got one of those big guests on today, guys.
Oh, it's so funny because I am 5'0". So you would never look at me and be able to tell any of that is the case.
That's what I'll focus on. Thank you guys so much for giving us your intro. One of the questions that we always tend to start with is just like that baseline of why did you guys decide to go into the service? And if there's any way that you can sort of tie it into like that sense of advocacy that you feel really oriented towards now, like at what point did that start in your military service for you?
Yeah, I'll start. I tell the story about how I ended up in the Army. I was in the Army National Guard, and I was in college, and I was in the student union. And on one side of the student union was the National Guard recruiter, and on the other side was the Peace Corps. And I was like, I need to serve my community in some way. Which path do I go? And when you're 19, maybe that doesn't seem as the dichotomy isn't as apparent, but it truly was this really pivot moment for me. Service was something that was really ingrained in my life. I mean, my parents, my grandparents all served their community in some way, either in the military or as you know, public servants and firefighters, police officers, et cetera. So it was really important for me to figure out a way to kind of carry that message of service forward. And I, went in for did 8 years. And once I got out, I kind of figured out I was thinking like, what do I do now? Right? What does it mean to serve your community when you don't have a uniform, when you don't have a flag or a formation to go to? And, what does that mean? So I tried a few different paths after that, and ended up here, and we could talk about that later. But that's really my origin story, is that we're joining the Army.
Okay.
So my origin story is a little less exciting. So I was a communications major at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University. And if anyone even knows what that is, they know that it is a very expensive school to attend. So after I graduated, I really wanted to continue my education. And I had quite a few friends and family members as well that served, and really imparted on me that if you want to go back to school for free, the military is the way to do it. So I did start with a little bit less of a service-minded aspect, but once I was in, I really felt a sense of duty and a sense of advocacy that needed to be explored within my community. And when I say my community, I mean Black community, the female community, because those are vastly underrepresented groups within the military. And as my service went on, as I served, I began to see that more and more. And so once I got out of the military and transitioned, I joined Minority Veterans of America as their communications director. And it was absolutely amazing to see the work that MVA was doing within the community, making sure veterans had a sense of community space where they could come together and, talk about their experiences and talk about things that have really traumatized them. And they can't really talk about it because, with a lot of civilian folks, the war stories can get a little intense. So having a space where folks can come together, especially who have, experienced some of that racial or gender-based or sexual identity-based trauma, having someone to talk to and events to go to where you can see yourself represented and see other members of the community that have a lot of the same experiences that you do has been vastly important. And that just has encouraged me to continue to serve. And that's why I'm at the Chamberlain Network.
I like that, especially because in my work where I read a lot of disability claims from people, there's a lot of statements about the way that they felt underrepresented in service and there was no one who they could go to at that time. And so you're filling such a critical role by giving all of these underrepresented communities a space where they feel safe to talk about their stories. Because even when we try, someone like me, a civilian, there's things that I just won't be able to understand. So I'm very grateful for the work that you're doing in that respect. One of the questions that we ask, and you guys can answer this however it feels most appropriate to you, but the purpose of the podcast is to help civilians who have not been in a wartime setting to really understand what that was like. So if one of our listeners were to come to you and to say, what's one story that you have from service that would help me to understand what that experience is really like, what comes to mind? Chris, I can see that you're laughing a little.
No, I don't know what Crystal's experience was. I think, I don't know. Being overseas in a combat zone, it feels like a combination between MASH and
you are dating yourself right now, Chris.
Well, that's what I'm trying to figure out how do you describe this environment that you're in that's very, very dangerous. And every day you wake up, you go outside the wire and you're like, I don't know if this is it. I don't know what it's going to be like, but it is what it is. And, that mindset in of itself is very difficult to tell people or to, I guess, transmit to people. And so I think what I remember about being in Iraq was the comedy, right? The humor that we had that we just, had in our daily lives, to get us through everything. And as if you were to actually sit down and think about the amount of times you were mortared or shot at or all the really bad things that happened, it would really be depressing. And that would not be a really good way to kind of live my life anyways. And so I think about, going into Saddam's palace and doing and sliding down the banisters as many times as I could with my 19-year-old privates that I drug along. I was like, hey, we had an opportunity to go to this palace and let's check it out. And, pretending to kick down doors, just doing really silly things, or someone's mother sending them a care package on Halloween with googly eyes. Right. And people running around the living area with googly eyes. It's just that those are the things that I really, remember or try to remember from my time overseas. And, but other people are different. So.
Yeah, I think for me, and to Chris's point, there really is no civilian match that you can possibly put into words of what war is like. I will say for me, my time overseas was pointed by the camaraderie because by me being part of 160th SOAR, the mechanics, we did a lot of our work during the day. And then a lot of the pilots flew and did their missions at night. And so in Iraq, in the middle of summer, it is 117 degrees. And so being out in that heat, you really find ways to build community because the only thing you're trying to do is take your mind off of the heat. You are sweating in places no one should ever sweat. And it is an experience that isn't like anything else. And I remember one moment where, I was overseas and my birthday fell during my deployment. And I had a good friend of mine send me a care package, and you're not allowed to drink when you're overseas. So she sent me some alcohol in a Listerine bottle, and a bunch of my battle buddies. We just sat around and we shared this, bottle of alcohol that was contraband and just had a really good time. And you have to find ways to find a little bit of peace and a little bit of happiness in the middle of what is abstract chaos.
That I really like your answer. As soon as you were talking about how sweaty you were, I was just thinking about like, thank you for your service. Like, that's not what people think of when they say that, right? But like, it's such a part of the experience. Yeah. And I like, Chris, what I liked about yours is I think military humor is really specific, right? And I think that a lot of people who don't understand it can find it like a little off-putting. Like I have definitely seen where veterans are like joking around with each other and a civilian comes up and they're like, you don't have to laugh about that. You can tell me the truth. And it's like, just let them have it. Like, just let them have whatever they needed to be able to cope. And it was just so funny to see the veterans all turn around and be like, this is how, like we deal with the situation. And it's something we saw during, Afghan evac too, which we'll get into a little bit later. What I liked and am struck by with your answers is that they were both positive. And sometimes when we have guests come on here, their answers are a little bit different. So what I'd like to know is, at what moment did you guys decide that your military service was over, and what sort of contributed to that decision for you to say, okay, this is something that I love, but it's also time for me to go?
I'll jump in first, Chris. I would say that I don't think my military service is over, because while there is a distinction between service member and veteran, the facets and the tenets of service and duty and leadership and integrity, all of those things stick with you. They stay with you. And so my level of military service continues as I become advocates for veterans and service members and find ways to connect with the veteran community and make sure that veterans, as you see in the VA every decade, that they have what they need and they're getting the services and the resources that are available to them and that they deserve. So I would venture to say that it's ongoing for me.
I like that answer.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, the Chamberlain Network is just one of many veterans groups out there that are trying to tap into this spirit, especially in the GWAT veteran community of, we did this thing, now what? Yep. Right? Our service didn't stop when we took off the uniform. And I want to put this sense of duty and service to work, because I volunteered during a 20-year war, basically, right? Not very many other generations of veterans can say that they, all pretty much as a whole raised their hand in a time of ongoing conflict. We knew what we were going to do. Mm-hmm. We knew what was going to happen to us. And now that we're out, like, that sense of duty hasn't gone away. And so I agree with Crystal.
Okay.
Yeah. And I truly think that those tenets that are ingrained in us in our military service is what we're bringing to the Chamberlain Network as well. So making sure that every citizen knows their responsibility through voting, making sure that they are, adhering to their civic engagement duty. So really making sure that those tenets come together and they, kind of congeal and build upon one another is another, key facet in what we're doing at Chamberlain Network.
Well, I think one of the things that I've noticed just in observing what the veteran experience is that a lot of people can feel lost once they actually leave the military. And I think in a lot of situations, it's because you guys do still have this very strong desire to contribute to your community. And those tenets of, wanting to serve and advocate, like, those are still there, but you don't have that same structure to accomplish that. So I'm curious what your experience was like when you guys retired. And if you were talking to another veteran who's in that situation, how you would guide them on like to get a value add from that experience. So to say these were ways that it was difficult, and these were ways that I really started to feel a little bit more control over my retirement experience.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, I didn't retire. I ETS'd.
Okay.
I know there's a difference, and so I am not that old. Although, actually, technically, I think I probably could retire this year if I had stayed in. Speaking of dating myself, yeah, so I got out in 2012, and I didn't really know what to do, how to talk about my veteranness, my militariness, right? Because for most of my teens and 20s, I was I had this identity that came with a ready-made family, and I knew how to talk about it. And these are my people, right? 8 years of my life. You get out in your late 20s. That's a pretty significant chunk of your life that you have an identity pre-formed, and you get out. They hand you your 214, and off you go into the world to kind of navigate the space. And I didn't really feel comfortable in that veteranness for a long time. It wasn't until it wasn't until I joined Veterans for American Ideals in 2016 where I really found a home. That's another organization that I eventually led, but it's where I found a home among like-minded veterans of veterans who cared about human rights and democracy. So it was about 4 or 5 years where people would. I moved to Spain. I moved totally out of the veteran community. I didn't have very many veteran friends, and so it was a very isolating experience for a long time. But I'm glad that the veteran space has evolved since then, and there are a lot more places for veterans now to go and to find a home.
So my experience was, I would say, extremely different than what most veterans go through. I got out almost 10 years after Chris, so I was medically retired in 2021.
That felt personal, buddy. That one felt like a personal shot.
All right. It's all right.
I didn't want to call him old, but here we are. And so I was very intentional. Well, let me back up. So I came into the military a little bit older. So I was 24 when I joined. Most folks are 18. So that made me the mom in a lot of my military groups, because most of my battle buddies are 18, 19 years old, have probably never washed their own clothes before. That's a real story that actually happened in basic training.
That does not surprise me.
They don't know how to put the stuff into the washing machine.
They don't know how to separate the clothes.
Wild.
I was like, are you serious? Is this happening right now? So I ended up being the mom in a lot of those spaces. So I brought a different level of gravitas and professional experience and life experience when I joined the military. So when I transitioned, I had already finished my degree. I had already had a professional career beforehand. And so I didn't go back into the civilian world completely unaware and completely confused as to what my future could look like. So I made every opportunity to take advantage of a lot of the resources that are available. So hiring our Heroes Fellowship, ACP, which is American Corporate Partners. I did a lot of research around how can I leverage my military service to further my career post-service. And so I think a lot of veterans aren't necessarily privy to those types of things. And there's also a dearth of mentorship at the transitioning level. A lot of veterans are forced to face a lot of their transition alone. And to Chris's point, very isolated. When I was transitioning, I already had my job at Minority Veterans of America lined up because of networking and because of making sure I am involved in the community. But I have heard plenty of stories about how isolating and intimidating it can be transitioning out.
I almost feel guilty because I've been working in Veterans Affairs for 9 years, right? But it was years before I had any sort of understanding what it felt like for somebody to leave service. Like I just, in my mind, wouldn't you be excited? Like you've been to war, you've been in combat, you've sacrificed a lot. So like, wouldn't that moment feel so joyful and so freeing. And what I'm actually realizing is that it actually like it removes a lot of that stability and sense of purpose that veterans have had. And so for the people who are listening to this and trying to understand what that experience is like, if you do know somebody who is separating from the service, check in with them, because a lot of them are totally cool and they have something that's figured out and they know where they want to go and how they want it to look. But a lot of people don't. And when you're at that age and you have had something there to sort of structure your life for so long, to lose that's really hard. Crystal, I think you said that one of your first jobs out was for Minority Veterans of America.
Yes.
What was that experience like? Like, what kind of work did you do? And like, what was one really good experience that you had in that position?
So before I answer that, I want to go back to what you said about the experience of veterans and it not necessarily being a joyous time. I think my transition was a double-edged sword, because while I did miss the stability and the regimented schedule, because I am a creature of habit, I love having a routine.
Yes.
The other side of that is I did not have to wake up at 4 a.m. anymore. It was glorious to watch the sun come up, because I hadn't been able to in 5 years.
Yeah. Yep.
So I just wanted to put that out there. I love sleep. But speaking to the Minority Veterans of America, I was their communications director. So I had the opportunity to create some really exciting campaigns around Black History Month, around ensuring that veterans are aware that they can get medical cards for medical marijuana now, because the opioid crisis is insane within the military community. And there is a huge stigma about how veterans are on opioids and it's because they want to be. Mm-hmm. No, these are folks that have had their bodies put through such rigor and such intense physical exertion that they need these things. But I think that Minority Veterans of America really afforded me an opportunity to also see the other side of being a veteran. It explained to me how we're not just our service. It is something that has created a certain persona, of course, because you've done it for 10, 15 years, but also we are more than the uniform. We have all of these things to offer as veterans. And I think, especially in the employment sector, a lot of those talents and skills are being overlooked, and veterans are a largely underemployed resource when it comes to that talent pipeline. And it is saddening because we have so much to offer. Clearly, we're regimented folks. We have schedules. We know how to follow directions. And so being a part of MVA really helped me see that serving as veterans is more than just the uniform. Yeah.
One of the things that I have always felt about that like separation process, and a friend of mine said this to me recently. He goes, I have 24 years of experience and I got to this level and I do not know how to take it and translate it to the civilian world. So I have done like really incredible things and I have garnered this like great reputation, but only in this one community. And how do I make that relevant? Because what they want to know is, how I'm going to function in a business setting. And that's something I haven't done before. So just putting the idea out there in the world that if anybody wanted to offer a service, I have always wanted veterans to have a place to go where they can say, tell me what my resume needs to say. Tell me how I can translate this in a way that it's going to actually land with the people who I want to work with, because it is really frustrating when you talk about that talent pipeline. I think we're missing like a huge number of veterans who could really be contributing in meaningful ways, but because they don't know how to speak to what their experience was, we miss out on that. So that's just something that if anybody out there wants to take that on, that would be awesome. Chris, my question for you. I know that after you left, you've worked in a lot of like very advocacy oriented roles. I think I met you when you were at Human Rights First. Talk to me about what those transitions sort of look like and why you went into each of those roles. And then I want to talk a little bit about how that led you into the Afghan evac work, just because that's where we met.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I got out and I had a teaching degree. So I was a teacher. And then I worked at Atlanta Public Schools working on anti-poverty initiatives, and helped create some really exciting programs on, how do you solve intergenerational poverty? Not that we did, but
that was a big question, I think.
It was an interesting project to work on, and it was term loaned, and after 2017, I kind of had to make a decision on where I wanted to go, and just kind of where the country was at that time. I had been volunteering for Vets for American Ideals at Human Rights First, and was offered the opportunity to come on staff there, and join that team, which, as I mentioned earlier, was really about how do you get veterans to care about human rights issues, specifically immigration. I'm the son of an immigrant. I'd mentioned earlier that I grew up in Great Britain during the Troubles and had really seen how political violence impacts communities, and political violence was something that was incredibly important to my family's immigrant story, because my father came from Northern Ireland around the time of the start of the Troubles. And so I felt like it was an important, path to start going down. So moved over to Vets for American Ideals, worked there, led the program starting in 2020. We could talk a little bit about Afghan evac, but I will say this year I decided to leave that program, and really focus on the democracy protection aspect of my veteranness, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like veterans care about democracy. We all signed a dotted line, swore an oath to defend this Constitution, which at its core is a democratic document.
Yep.
And I saw those ideals that we swore to defend were really coming under attack on both sides of the aisle. It's not a partisan thing. And so I decided to really make an effort to start the Chamberlain Network to organize veterans around that. But I'm happy to talk about Afghan evac. I'm not sure if you just want me to,
No, you're good. You're good. So the reason why I had wanted to ask about it is just because I'm selfish, and that's where I met you.
Yeah.
And I just remember being really struck by how motivated you seemed to be able to take your status as a veteran and to use it for the greater good, right? And I think a lot of veterans sometimes they don't know just how much integrity I think that word really carries with it. So like when I think if I go to Congress or I bring a veteran to Congress, who is more likely to land an impact? And it's the veterans, because you guys are coming from this very established place of, look, like I am interested in serving my country in whatever way that happens to look like. So I had met you doing the Afghanistan evacuation work. What was it that made you say, okay, I'm ready to move on? And where did that idea of Chamberlain Network really start to form?
Well, I will answer that question, but I do want to rewind and tell just an anecdote about what you just said.
Sure.
Our status as veterans really does make an impact, especially on our elected officials. And it became very, very clear to me well before Afghanistan. I was meeting with a member of Congress who shall remain nameless, but it was me and 3 other veterans and an Iraqi SIV recipient. So an SIV is a special immigrant visa, typically given to interpreters or translators or other folks who worked alongside U.S. forces. And we were talking to this member of Congress about the program and why they needed more visas and more support. And the member wouldn't look at the SIV recipient and would only address the veterans in the room. And he gave all of the veterans coins, little challenge coins, and shook all of our hands and totally ignored the SIV. And it was I'd always kind of like intellectually knew that veterans carry this message or this kind of gravitas, right, in our conversations. But to see it so viscerally like that, that this member of Congress would only focus on the veteran and not focus on this other person for whatever reason, whatever bias that person had, whether it was an immigrant or, religious faith or whatever. I mean, it was evident that there was a tension there. And so that it was in that moment that I knew that hey, this is real and we need to use our voices to do good. And so, Afghan evac came and we had been pushing for months, a few of us ahead of time to try to preemptively evacuate Afghans before the fall of Kabul, which we anticipated happening 2 years after that we left, but it happened even before we left. So our timing was a little off. But that work became incredibly personal to me and to many veterans, and it was very difficult for me to move away from that work. And so, after 3 years, I kind of looked around and said, "All right, we've done what we can do here. It's time to look at this other crisis that we're having in our country, and this crisis of faith and democracy." And so, really taking that idea that Afghan evac did so well, which is veterans at their kitchen tables can make an impact at the national level. Let's take that model and apply it towards this crisis in faith in the democratic institutions in our country. It's a very nebulous term, right? Afghan evac was very specific, very emotional, very concrete. But this is a little more difficult, and I think we can do it because we've shown that veterans and military family members and our allies can mobilize like that. So that's why we started the Chamberlain Network.
It's a really interesting story that you told about the SIV recipient as well. I also had that experience when I was doing Afghan evac work, and it was really that's again like where that veteranness is that double-edged sword, because yes, you do sort of garner like that automatic sense of integrity, like people want to listen to veterans. But on the other hand, I have also noticed a lot of situations where I think veterans are maybe used for their veteran status. And so it's less about listening to the things that they are advocating for and more about getting the picture with the veterans next to you so that you can say that you serve the veteran community. And I have always felt like, shouldn't we be treating veterans better than that? Yeah. Right. Like if we say to a veteran, your voice matters, then we need to be sitting down and actually listening to it. And so that's just something that like I have seen in sort of our advocacy world has been sort of a challenge.
Yeah. Real quick on that, like our mission is to empower veterans to defend democracy. And we're not interested in parachuting in to get a photo op with people in front of a Capitol. We really want to train veterans to be leaders in their communities so they're part of the social fabric of that community going forward. So that it's not something that just kind of sweeps in on one specific issue and then we go away, but that these veterans have the skills to then go off and do other things. And we can act as an incubator in and of ourselves of spinning all of these projects off into their, into their communities. What matters in Boise isn't going to matter in Kalamazoo, and it's going to be different than what's going to be important in Atlanta.
Yes.
But if we can give vets the tools and the motivation and the credibility to go out and do the things that are important in their communities, then they can go off and accomplish great things.
I agree. I love everything about Chamberlain Network. I'm so excited to talk more about it. Yeah. So at the beginning of the conversation, we were talking about why veterans should care about democracy. So say a veteran comes to you and they say, I'm interested in what you're doing, but I'm not really sure that it's a good fit. What would you say to them? Like, veterans should care about democracy because?
Yeah. I mean, I think we as veterans, I mentioned it earlier, we all swore an oath to this idea of America. We did it for different reasons. We did it for school tuition. We did it for, family tradition. We did it, because we were bored. But at the end of the day, especially GWAT, right? Like we knew, as I said, we knew what was going to be asked of us. We were potentially going to could die for this idea. And so that at some level, you cared about this country and you cared about the systems that make this country good. So you need to take the skills that this country has given you and turn it back on to your communities. So and what I tell people is look around your communities. Is it perfect? Is there something that you think that you could fix at city council, at the state house, in your neighborhood association meeting? Like what is it in your community that is unjust or unfair? And let's put you to work to try to fix that.
Okay. Crystal, what about you? If somebody comes to you and they say, I'm really interested in this work, like what would you say? This is why we should care about democracy.
Why would you care about democracy is a pretty loaded question, especially in the context of our socio-political environment currently. But
did you think I was going to give you like a low ball on this show? Come on.
But you know what this is. I would say that in order to make sure that we have a just and equitable future, or as close to it as we can possibly get, right? Civic engagement is paramount, and it needs to happen at all levels. It needs to happen at the level of you calling your local city commissioner to get that pothole fixed, all the way up into standing in front of Congress and offering testimony about sexual assault, which was something I was also a part of with Minority Veterans of America. And really ensuring that people understand that they can get involved at every level, because I think a lot of folks have the misconception that you have to get involved at this grandiose level. You have to do something very large to make an impact, instead of understanding that just voting, just circling that bubble and taking time out to mail your ballot or go into an office or wherever your vote is, that is how that you are moving the needle on democracy. So understanding that while the grandiose, large actions are wonderful and welcomed, especially at the Chamberlain Network, come get involved. But also something as seemingly insignificant as voting and making sure that your voice is heard at the ballot box, because that's how we really change democracy. And that's how we take each other's hands and reach across the aisles and make sure that democratic ideals don't come with a party.
I like that your example was also about a pothole, because one of the veterans I'm closest with.
Example.
No, I was just going to say, there is a veteran who I'm super close with, and he has spent like 3 years trying to get the pothole on this main street fixed. And when it finally happened, he was like, I've never done anything better for my community. It's like, you know what? I do believe that is how that feels. So functionally speaking, you guys are still like a fairly new organization. So what are the specific program areas that you're like focusing on or that people can get involved in?
Yeah. So we did launch earlier this summer. August 1st was our kind of official launch date. So right now we're recruiting veterans and we're focusing on Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan.
Got it.
That doesn't mean we're not taking vets from other countries or other states. It just means that this is where we see the real need. And, we're not doing this primarily because of any type of political reason. Yes, these are battleground states, but these are also states that have a high number of veterans in their communities. There is easy access to media markets and government in those communities. So we really were trying to think very strategically about, if we're going to create networks of veterans, where do we need to start to then grow that network? And we're calling our networks we're calling them community hubs. So we're looking for leaders to start these community hubs in these communities. And so if you're interested, please let us know. We are engaging on things like political violence. We've seen a number of assassination attempts, unfortunately, this election cycle. And that has a really dangerous effect on our democracy. So
what a crazy sentence. That like we've seen multiple assassination attempts. I'm sorry. I just pause at that to be like, what a time that we are living in. Sorry, continue.
And we're concerned about after the election, like what is January 6th is something that's still very fresh in many of our minds. And how do we stop this? We're also looking at how do we explain to the American public at large the voting process, right? The certification process we all learned in 2020 can be confusing and complicated, and things go wrong or appear to go wrong. So we need trusted messengers out there, explaining these processes in each state. So that's something we're doing as well. And we're also partnering with a great coalition called Vet the Vote to organize veterans to be poll workers in their communities. So I'm very proud of the work that coalition does. And if you are not a poll worker, there is still time in many communities to register. So please reach out to your elections board and try to get that set up.
I like that what you guys do is not only provide information to make people feel more empowered, but it sounds like you also try to give them the skill sets that they need, which I think is really hard, because when you come to the table as a veteran, again, like you have that title. So people are automatically going to listen to you maybe a little bit easier than they would just somebody else. How are you guys going to give these veterans the skills that they need to be successful advocates?
Yeah. So right now what we're doing is we're organizing monthly training calls with veteran leaders. And so we're calling them our plank holder calls. Our inaugural year, we're going to call these all plank holders, because we see ourselves as a ship, and the first people on the ship are often called plank holders. So if you want that cool title, I'll get a T-shirt made up for you all later. But
it couldn't be better than the DD214 sweatshirt. Come on.
Oh, yeah. I mean, look, I'm all about a sweet T-shirt. But what we intend on doing next year is community workshop. We are searching for funding right now to make that happen, to bring experts in advocacy and training and that type of work to communities across the country and train veterans in their neighborhoods.
Okay. So either of you can take this, but like say a veteran comes to you and they say, I'm ready to start advocating for something, whether it be the democratic process or the pothole that I want to get filled. Like, what are some like firm things that you would say to a veteran to get started in that advocacy role? Like, what are some things that they could know that will help them to sort of like leverage their own voice?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think in order to get started, first of all, beginning is half the battle. And so folks really coming to terms with, I want to get involved is always the first step. I think becoming a poll worker is a really easy, low investment way to get started into the democratic process and that civic engagement. There are also ways to volunteer. There are ways to get involved at your county or city level. I think when folks are really clear about what their passion is, whether that is volunteering with, voting, or it is at the school board level, or if it is something having to do with infrastructure, back to those potholes, it really just boils down to folks understanding where their strengths and their passions lie. And you're curious about how to get involved. If you email us at Chamberlain Network, I'm sure we can get you involved and plugged into your community. I'm going to keep shamelessly plugging this.
It's not shameless. And we, just so that all of our listeners know, we are going to put the link to the Chamberlain Network website in the show notes. But if you have any questions and you want us to connect you, please also feel free to reach out to us at GCV and we will get you set up. Chris, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
Yeah, I think the thing that I don't think many people understand or know or even aware exists, that each elected official, most elected officials will say that, from school board all the way up to senator, they have constituent services in their office. They have at least one person in their office most of the time that's dedicated to solving your problem. And it could be a pothole. It could be disability paperwork with the VA. I had an issue with a utility company once who refused to turn on services. And it was a whole big thing. I called my state senator, and within 24 hours of that phone call, I was on the phone with their government relations person. And so we got our gas turned back on. So that is a little hack that I don't think a lot of people know. And I would just encourage you to figure out, like, what is the issue that you're facing? Find out the person that in your elected official network that can solve that problem or is best suited to solve that problem, and just figure and find and give them a call. They'll help you. And if they don't, they'll tell you where to go.
I will say too, like, I think that sometimes it can sound intimidating when you're like, I call a senator's office. Like, that's a big deal. Like, I don't want to bother them. The people who are typically in that like veterans liaison role are people who genuinely want to serve the veteran community. And so you're talking about like how they helped you with this issue. Like, that's what they're there for. And I have seen even in my job where they will submit like a lot of inquiries on behalf of veterans with their cases, and then they follow up. Like, I find that those people are very, very open to wanting to talk to veterans. That is why their job exists. So if anybody is out there and saying, this is something I want to do, but I feel intimidated, don't, because those people are here specifically to listen to you. And I have always found them to be actually like really good, faithful advocates, which is a relief. Yeah. Pivoting a little bit, you said in the very beginning that Chamberlain Network is bipartisan, and Grumpy Combat Veteran and Friends is also bipartisan. So we started, I think, just a couple months before you in March. And this has been a super interesting time to start a bipartisan organization, given that the election is coming up and that I think things are so much more divisive than they were even 8 years ago. Like, the political process and the ways that you can advocate and engage are just different. So I'm curious, like, how this upcoming election has really affected your work as you're trying to get off the ground. And have you had any sort of challenges related to that bipartisan sort of approach that you guys want to take?
Yeah, I think it's still very easy for some people to get caught in this mold, is that in order to be bipartisan, you can't talk about politics, right? That's not true, right? Like our democracy is a bipartisan issue, and if there are a group of people out there that are calling for policies or ideas and that's dangerous to that, it's our obligation to speak out against that, and we can do that in a way that doesn't tell people to vote for, but it educates the community about the policies and the impacts of those that those kind of themes could have on the country. And so that's that has become less difficult actually as we've gone on over the past 8 years or so, because it has become very clear that there within one political party that there is a significant anti-democratic movement that is not shared by the broader political party I'll just say the Republican Party, for example, right? So we can specifically talk about party politics and say, like, look, we have Republicans in the Chamberlain Network because they care about democracy, and their own party can't even get it together. So let's call out this anti-democratic movement on the right, but it's not just on the right; it's growing on the left as well. And I was actually kind of spurred on to create this because I was watching in a last city council meeting, as one is wont to do, and I saw an activist who was clearly a left-leaning activist and meant well and wanted to say things that were important to her about an issue that she cared about, but she kept going off on this kind of these tangents, saying democracy isn't working, this institution isn't working for us, we need to tear this down and create something new. And I'm thinking, with what? Like, what's the plan, right? We are founded on the idea that each person can vote and be a part of this government. What are you going to replace that with? So partisanship is a difficult thing to walk around, but it doesn't mean that we can't talk about politics.
I agree.
And
Crystal, what do you think?
I wanted to add to that a little bit. When we talk about important nonpartisan initiatives, of course, Chamberlain Network is all about very, very intentionally talking about defending democracy and making sure that political violence is seen as something that is not tolerated. It is something that cannot continue. It is tearing at the fabric of our democracy. And also, when I think about veterans and nonpartisan initiatives and legislation, we talk about the PACT Act. So when Chris talks about how we can focus on an issue that is something that is about basic needs. It is about basic human rights and how veterans need access to this care because of everything that happened with inhaling all of these toxic fumes and that came in service to this country and shouldn't have. Issues like that are what we are really talking about and really focusing on when we talk about something that is nonpartisan. We have to see these issues as things that affect everyone and not just one party or the other.
Just for anybody who's listening, if you don't know what the PACT Act is, so it was a law that went into effect, I think last year or 2021 maybe, is the effective date for it. But it essentially offers an avenue where we will give automatic benefits to people if they had a certain type of exposures during service. The reason why it's important is because it can take years off of a disability claim for a veteran. And we will essentially just say, we think that you got sick because of this. The science supports it. We're going to grant it. And so that's a really great example, Crystal, actually, of like seeing people on both sides of the aisle really come together for something that matters to a community that should be important to all of us. So I'm a big fan of the laws like the PACT Act that make things easier for veterans to access their disability benefits. And Chris, thinking more about what you were saying, I do think that we have seen a sort of shift in the narrative lately where we look at democracy as being synonymous with the political parties that are currently engaging with it. And so when you hear these people make those sweeping statements of democracy isn't working, really, I think what they're more speaking to is the systems that are meant to implement and protect it are not working the way that, we had hoped. Yeah. So when you think about the long-term future of Chamberlain Network, what do you want that to look like? Like, what are you really hoping that you guys can achieve in the next couple of years?
Yeah. I mean, you're absolutely right. People feel like the democratic processes aren't working. And what I want to do, what we want to do at the Chamberlain Network is create at veterans who are trained in how to, work the democratic process to solve problems in their communities. Like, that's what I would like to see. 5 years from now, in every state, I would like to see a community hub that's led by veterans who care about issues in their community, and they know who to call. They know what to say. They know how to create talking points or write an op-ed or how to get on camera to articulate a vision for a better community. That's my vision. And so, when someone gets up in front of city council and says, instead of saying this isn't working, I want them to say, it's not working, and then this is what we can do about it.
Mm-hmm.
So I envision a future where everyone in the community sees themselves as a part of the democratic process and a part of civic engagement. So that could be the mom who's a stay-at-home parent, and she sees that there are so many unjust things happening at the school level, so she gets involved in the school board.
Mm-hmm.
Or there is a graduate fresh out of high school who wants to be involved in policy and advocacy for their high school and whatever the case is, sports or whatever kids do nowadays, like, getting TikTok unbanned. I don't know what's happening. So really making sure that everyone sees themselves as a part of that process and making sure that whatever matters to you, you can change it and you can be the change that you would like to see. So I would love to see Chamberlain Network really push forward that message and ensure that people know that civic engagement is for everyone.
Right.
I think what's so important about what you're saying is that I can see where people might find our language on this podcast a little bit intimidating because we're using a lot of like political terminology. But really what we're talking about, it's just ways to get involved in your community.
Right.
And what they're talking about, like, we're making jokes about potholes, but like that really does still qualify as some way of contributing to your community good. And so Chamberlain Network is not just about like, how do you influence like democracy at large, but it's about all the little ways in which veterans can like make the process more attainable and more accessible to the groups that really need to benefit from it. So I hope that if somebody is listening and they're interested, that, you guys won't feel so intimidated, because from what I can tell, Chamberlain Network is very much oriented towards making the veteran feel empowered. We are almost at the end of our time for this episode. So I want to ask one more, let's say, selfish question, right? So we have talked a lot about what Chamberlain Network can do for the greater good and for the veteran community. But say somebody comes to you and they say, I want to give you money. What are they going to get out of that? Like, what is their contribution to Chamberlain Network? Like, what is that going to get the people who donate financial support and for the veterans who contribute to it? Like, let's give them a really good, strong pitch.
Yeah. Look, you're getting to support experts who understand how to mobilize people to do advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
Like that, and I know that might not, directly impact you as an individual who's giving, but we get to then take that money and turn it around and go back to your community and train people. The folks who are here at Chamberlain Network, we have, Crystal has a lot of experience with communications. We have people who are experts in advocacy. We have people who are experts in government and in outreach. We have a team who knows how to mobilize people to put veterans to work. So we could take that money and then turn it right back around and find 3 people in your community who could fix that pothole, or who can, go to that city council meeting and maybe stop a book ban from going to effect, or who can show up with the state house and help get more drop boxes in communities on election day. Like that's what your money's going to do.
Mm-hmm.
I would even add a little bit additional to that, Chris, for these veteran leaders that are heading up these hubs and becoming more involved in their community. There are quite a few reverberations and kind of tertiary advantages of becoming a community leader in this way. You learn how to communicate better. You have a larger network because you're communicating and really coming closer to folks in your community. You're learning how to become a poll worker and all of the benefits that come with that. So while it may not be something that is, to Chris's point, a direct benefit, there are all these tertiary benefits to becoming a community leader.
Mm-hmm.
And you get to feel good about yourself at the end of the day.
I mean, I think that the thing that I'm hearing and everything that you guys have said over the last hour, the word that comes to mind is empowerment.
Mhm.
Right? Like you guys very much want to contribute to your community, but you also want the veterans who are participating in your work to feel good about what they're doing and to be able to take that skill set and that reputation as a veteran and to really leverage it into doing something that's important to them. What I think is so great about Chamberlain is that you guys are essentially saying, we don't even care what it is that you think is important. We want you to just know how to advocate for it. And the reason why I felt so strongly about bringing Chris on, let me just give like a really good pitch, is because I did work closely with him during the Afghanistan evacuation. And that, we've talked about it on this show before, how absolutely gut wrenching that work was and how devastating it was for a lot of veterans, whether they served in Afghanistan or not. And one of the things I always was so impressed by, Chris, just as somebody watching your work, is that I felt like you somehow always had a way to infuse it with positivity. You wanted people to feel really good about what they were doing, even in the midst of work that should have and did feel really bad in its own ways. And so the fact that you have started this, A, it's not surprising, but B, like it's something that I am super, super grateful for and have a lot of faith in, because I have seen the ways that you have succeeded in working with the veteran communities before. So thank you so much for like coming on and talking about like your process for starting this organization. I just want to make sure, do you guys have any parting message that you want to leave our listeners with?
Oh, I'm just, no, that was very kind, Kate. And I'm very, the Afghan work really changed so many lives. And I'm just so forever grateful for that community. So yeah, thank you.
Yeah. And Crystal, I do have to say that this is our first time interacting, but my bonus daughter is 13, almost 14, and she is already absolutely unequivocally sure that she is going to be going into the Air Force when she is 18. She has it all planned out. And so the benefit to episodes like this for me is that I can also show it to my kid and say, look at what it means to be like an empowered, strong female veteran who knows what her voice can sound like and how it can contribute to things. Like it makes me feel hopeful for her future just at the age of 14 to know that there are women like you out there. So I'm especially grateful that you made the time to come here and to talk about your work with Chamberlain. I think it's so important for veterans, but also to girls and minorities to see somebody like you in a position like this. So to all of our listeners, as always, thank you so much for sticking with us and joining us and offering our guests a place to heal loudly. And to both of our guests, I am so excited to see where Chamberlain Network takes us. I will make sure to post all of the links to the website and all of our contact information at the bottom if you guys want to get involved. And if you are a veteran, I genuinely believe that this could only add value to your lives and your experiences. So thank you so much, everybody, and we will see you next time.